The story begins with Tin Thian, a deadbeat husband deep in gambling debt who often used his wife's money for bets. Not only that, Tin Thian would get drunk and beat his wife and child, and was now planning to sell his own daughter to pay off his debt. Overwhelmed by pent-up resentment, his wife accidentally killed him in a fit of rage. But before she could escape, another gang burst in to collect the debt, drawing a curious crowd that the thugs quickly threatened away. The thugs then turned on the wife, who panicked and begged that she would do anything if they just spared her daughter. However, they were too despicable, as they wanted to take everything. Just in this moment of despair, a bolt of lightning from the sky struck the husband's body. After that lightning strike, Tin Thian then suddenly got up and stopped the thugs from harming his wife. It turns out he was an immortal from the upper realm, whose wandering soul entered this body after being cast down during a calamity. With the body severely injured and his divine soul shattered, he had to resolve things quickly or he would also dissipate. Tin Thian then was seen using the Luochin divine thought, and his erupting spiritual energy easily overpowered the thug, and thus begins his journey of leveling up with his wife and daughter. So please like and subscribe to the Miss Manhwa channel to follow the exciting story. On a quiet night in a secluded alley, a child's cries echoed, "Mommy! Mommy, I need you." Inside a small dimly lit house, a woman clung to her husband's leg and pleaded, "Tin Thian, you are a scumbag. Hon Hon is your daughter. How could you use her to repay your debt? I will work more jobs to pay back and hi." The little girl cried loudly as her father carried her away. "Mommy! Mommy!" At this, Tin Thian then frowned and retorted, "That little money you earn is not even enough for my gambling. Do not you know who Hai is?" He violently grabbed his wife's hair and shouted, "If we do not pay off this debt, tomorrow he will tear us to pieces for money." Saying this, Tin Thian then flew into a rage and shoved his wife away. "Get out!" He continued carrying Hon Hon away, while the little girl reached for her mother. "Mommy! Mommy!" Shoved hard to the ground, a stunned Divan struggled back up. "Give me back my daughter!" Enraged, she used all her strength to run forward, endlessly cursing him. "You animal!" Divan grabbed Tin Thian's shoulder and pulled him back. "Give me my daughter." She then quickly snatched her child back, and while he was off balance, she gave him a powerful push. At that exact moment, Tin Thian then accidentally stepped on a beer bottle on the ground. Because of this, he slipped and fell backward, his face a mask of complete astonishment. Unable to stop his fall, Tin Thian then hit his head very hard on the ground. After the fall, he lay motionless on the floor for several minutes. A few seconds later, a lot of blood poured from his head, while his eyes remained wide open. Seeing this, Divan was utterly horrified, hugging her daughter tightly to shield her from the gruesome scene. The little girl was so shocked she burst into tears. "Mommy! Hon Hon is scared. Hon Hon is so scared." Seeing her daughter cry, she gently comforted her. "Hon Hon, do not cry. It is okay now." Divan looked at her husband's body on the ground, gently comforting her daughter. "It is alright now." Just then, a few gangsters suddenly kicked the door down and rushed inside. The leader stepped forward and yelled loudly, "Tintu then! Dead collector, get out here now." But he suddenly stopped in his tracks, as something was blocking the entrance. Looking down, he only saw Tin Thian then lying motionless in a pool of blood. Tunkao asked curiously, "Tintu then, what trick are you playing now? Faking your death on the spot? You have to pay even if you are dead." As he spoke, he glanced over at Divan. "Am I right, Mrs.?" Seeing Tunkao looking at her, she immediately stepped back to shield her daughter. Her desperate screams came from inside the hall. "Get out! Get out, you thugs, you scum!" Which drew the attention of the people outside. In an instant, a crowd of curious onlookers had gathered in front of the door. Seeing this, Tunkao cursed, "What are you all looking at? This is legal debt collection." "Now scram," a middle-aged man spoke up. "You collect debts by kidnapping a child. Is there no law and order anymore?" Hearing the man speak up for them, he gave a cunning smirk. "You want to be their hero, old man?" He then moved closer and threatened while pointing. "You want me to bring my guys to your hall and demand money from you instead?" Threatened like that, everyone feared getting involved, so they made excuses and left. "Oh, I forgot my soup on the stove. Time to go." Tunkao then turned back to Divan with a wicked look. "Now, Mrs., where were we?" Surrounded by the thugs, she grabbed a sharp knife. "Do not you come near me." Divan brandished the knife as she stood to protect her daughter. "I will fight to the death with anyone who takes another step." Hearing this, the whole group of thugs burst out laughing as if watching a play. Then Tunkao sneered and slowly approached. "Back when I played with knives?" The next second he grabbed her hand and snatched the knife. "You were not even born yet." He leaned close to her face pervertedly. "Let me show you how a knife is really played." As soon as he finished, Tunkao swiped the knife at Divan's dress, and she screamed from the abuse. Seeing her dress strap cut, his shameless underlings cheered excitedly. The Beat's knife skills are superb. Tunkao's eyes widened, focusing on Divan's chest. With one side of her dress torn, her chest was more exposed, so she covered it with her hand and trembled while crying. His lecherous side emerged as he licked the knife and grinned. That bum Thian was always good at seducing women. At that moment, Tunkao suddenly cried out in pain. He looked down to see Hon Hon had run over and was biting his leg fiercely. Getting even angrier, Tunkao ordered, "Take this little brat away," and Hai said not to hurt her. Following the order, A goon ran over to carry her away, and seeing this Hon Hon reached out and cried loudly, "Mommy!" Watching her daughter being taken away while unable to do anything, Divan cried out helplessly, "Hon Hon!" In desperation, she took a gamble. "I beg you to spare the child. As long as you spare my daughter, I will do anything you ask. She is just a child." However, Tuanka laughed bizarrely. "You dare to bargain with me? Let me tell you, I want it all." At his words, Divan screamed curses. "You animals! Are not you afraid of retribution for your wicked deeds?" He just laughed louder, staring at her chest as he reached out. "Then tell God to show himself." Just as Tuanka finished speaking, as if by his wish, a bolt of lightning struck the metal roof from the sky, hitting Tin Thian's corpse. Seeing that scene, the three underlings were jaw-droppingly astonished. On this side, Tuanka and Divan also stopped, looking on in horror, and while everyone was confused, a hand suddenly grabbed Tuanka's hand tightly. Seeing this, he was extremely surprised. And on the other side, Divan was also in disbelief as she stuttered, "Thian then." Now Tin Thian then had returned from the dead, his face becoming so cold that Tuanka froze in place. Tintu then, with a bloodied face, he thought to himself, "This body is severely injured and the divine soul is shattered. It is in a critical state and I must resolve this quickly. I must heal these wounds or this flow de luo divine soul of mine will dissipate." Then his face darkened as he threatened, "I will give you one chance. Release the child and leave immediately with your subordinates." With a very cold gaze, Tin Thian then looked at Tuanka and said, "Scram." Seeing his different expression and attitude, the goons were extremely surprised, and even Tuanka was stunned into silence for a few seconds. But the next second, he burst out laughing. "Tintu, then have you died and gone crazy?" Holding the knife tightly, Tuanka asked, "Are you worthy of using the word scram?" He then charged forward. "I will take care of you first." At this point, brothers and sisters, do not forget to give Miss Manhwa a like to cheer on Tin Thian than to deal with this goon. However, just as Tuanka was about to stab him, Tin Thian then stopped it with his bare hands. At this moment his eyes narrowed, as a spiritual light radiated from him with the Luochan divine thought technique, and then came the potential unleashed move. A golden aura of spiritual energy enveloped Tin Thian's body. As he gained strength, his arms began to tense up, his muscles bulging. Tin Thian then used his strength to tightly grip Tuanka's wrist. In the next second his wrist was bent backward, causing Tuanka to scream and cry out in excruciating pain. Seeing this scene, Divan's mouth was wide open, as she never expected her husband to be so strong. Over here, the goons were equally shocked, their mouths hanging open, with his wrist broken. Tuanka trembled all over, and he looked at Tin Thian then with a pensive expression. Stuttering, "You," after coming to his senses, one of the goons holding Hon Hon shouted provocatively, "Tintu, then you have not died enough yet. You dare to touch our beat? Try to touch him again and see." But against his expectation, he punched Tuanka in the face without hesitation. This one punch made his mouth bleed, and his head spun like a record. Then he fell face first to the ground, bumping into a nearby goon. Another goon ran to help Tuanka up. "But he really dared to touch you?" Then he boldly pointed at Tin Thian then and ordered, "Brothers, get him." However, as he turned back, the goon was terrified and broke out in a cold sweat. He could only let out a gasp. He only saw the remaining men running for their lives as fast as they could. Tuanka's face darkened and he sweated coldly while cursing, "Damn it, none of them have any guts." Then he looked at the remaining man and said sweetly, "My brother, there is still true loyalty in this world." He pointed at the man and ordered, "You go deal with him, and I will promote you when we get back." However, unexpectedly, that man also fled. "But I will go back and inform Manhwa to get revenge for you." Seeing his loyal brothers abandon him, Tuanka stared wide-eyed and shouted, "Hey!" Now the scene suddenly became extremely tense. He sat on the ground sweating coldly as he faced Tin Thian then, his attitude completely different from before. Seeing Tin Thian then approaching, Tuanka flinched and screamed as if seeing a ghost. "What the hell?" Then he stammered, "Tintu then Noah then, no brother then, you know what happens when you offend and hi, brother." However, he just looked at him coldly and uttered a short word, "Scram." Hearing this, Tuanka immediately jumped up, and he seriously saluted respectfully, "Yes, sir." But as he ran outside, his true nature did not change as he shouted back, "You just wait for me. Do not run if you have got guts." Now only the three of them were left, and they silently watched the thugs leave for good. Seeing this display, so different from her husband's personality, Divan called out doubtfully, "Thian then, you." After the fierce battle in the small hall, the child's cries echoed again, "Mommy! Mommy!" Divan hugged the little girl and comforted her. "I am sorry, Hon Hon. Mommy has made you suffer." Tin Thian then turned and told the mother and daughter, "You two pack up and leave quickly. They will come back if you are late." She quietly stared at him without a word. He also looked at the mother and daughter silently for a long time. Divan asked worriedly, "What about you?" And Tin Thian then seriously affirmed, "I have my own ways." Just as he said that, his eyes suddenly widened. Tin Thian then clutched his head and collapsed, startling the mother and daughter. Blood poured from Tin Thian's head like a waterfall, and his eyes revealed a look of confusion. "This is bad. The body overexerted itself. The wound was suppressed with divine thought. A pool of blood fell, making him more confused. I can't take it anymore. He collapsed to the ground, and Divan quickly ran to help him up, asking, Thean then, what is wrong with you? Hey, do not scare me. He looked up and said with difficulty, please help me heal my wounds. She was confused and did not understand what he was saying. Heal you? But we do not have any money left to go to the hospital. I will go borrow some from the neighbors right now. As she was about to leave, he quickly grabbed her hand. No need for all that trouble. Thean then hugged her and said gently, just listen to my instructions. Over here. Hon Hon looked at them with a blank expression. The little girl excitedly clasped her hands and asked curiously, Mommy, what are you two doing? Divan and Thean then looked at the little girl with loving eyes. She quickly pushed him away in embarrassment. Daddy just wants to play a family game with Mommy. The innocent little girl ran over and demanded to join. Hon Hon wants to play too. She immediately raised her hand to stop the little girl. Hon Hon, it is time for bed now, Divan gently and softly instructed. You get on the bed right now? You hear? Mommy and Daddy will play with you tomorrow. Hon Hon rubbed her chin and thought for a moment. The obedient and understanding little girl ran to the bed and grabbed a blanket. She then asked, do I need to cover my head too? Divan's face turned red like a tomato, and she hastily ordered, sleep now. Do not get up until I call you. Hon Hon silently covered herself with the blanket and went to sleep. Seeing this, Thean then said, let us start. She stammered a little. Okay. Divan looked back shyly. The main sensitive point, the Shen Beast acupuncture point, her leg curled up, and it trembled slightly. Divan did not forget to remind Thean then, what time is it now for you to want this? He did not care and directly kissed her, which made Divan even more confused. Why is he like a different person? Thinking about it, she let everything go and closed her eyes to enjoy it. Oh, forget it. If he had not driven away those thugs, this family would have truly been shattered. He lightly pressed his fingers on her back, creating a large flame. Precious healing medicine from the divine true scripture, the yin-yang harmony method. Thean then stretched out his arms and the flame engulfed the entire room. True yang nurtures yin. The more he recited, the redder Divan's face became. When passion stirs, divine medicine appears. Spiritual fire erupted from her mouth, and Thean then absorbed it, extracting the essence to flesh and blood, mending broken bones, reversing life and death. Immediately, the wound on his forehead completely healed. His strong and firm arm stretched out. Someone punched a punching bag hard, making it bounce up. The punching bag, under strong force, swung back and forth continuously. From inside it, a pool of blood seeped out. He smiled with a satisfied and cunning look. Using a person as a punching bag is still the most satisfying. The person inside groaned. Anne, hi. The person struggled inside and said incoherently, you promised to let my wife and child go if I let you vent your anger on me? You must keep your word. He left and slung a towel over his shoulder, guaranteeing, I am a man of my word. Immediately after that, he thought of breaking his promise, but I am still not satisfied with this anger, so I will just have to sell your wife and child to northern Myanmar for their kidneys. Hearing this, the man could not help but curse. You bastard, you do so many evil things, you will surely face retribution. Suddenly, a few of his underlings ran in hastily to report. Anne hi. Tuankov stammered in fear. The person could not be brought back. I was silent. He just glanced back slightly. He forcefully pulled the sweat towel off and cursed torrentially. You are not new under my command. I reminded you again and again before you left. Hai stood in front of the punching bag and warned in a deep voice. That little girl is what the great benefactor behind me specifically requested. He punched the bag, tearing it open and making the person fall out. There must be no mistakes whatsoever. Seeing this, they fearfully took a few steps back. Hai looked at the man hanging upside down with blood dripping and scoffed. You all are a bunch of useless bums. He scowled and used all sorts of harsh words to curse. You can't even handle a trashy go-between. A man standing behind trembled as he recounted the incident. Anne hi. It is that guy Tintu then. At first we thought he was dead for sure. Who knew he would suddenly come back to life, becoming incredibly strong. None of us were his match. The bat's arm was broken by him. Hearing this, I fell silent, lost in thought. He let out a sound of interest. Saying that, I approached the man and asked with a friendly face, how did he break it? Without waiting for their answer, I took Chunka's hand curiously. First like this, he softly called, Anne hi. I did not wait any longer and twisted his wrist with a crack. Then it was like this. Right? The pain shot through Chunka's head, and he screamed in terror. Hai left, leaving him slumped on the ground, and ordered, I do not raise useless people. Take him away. Despite being severely injured, Chunka still pleaded, Anne hi. Please forgive me. Give me one more chance. After finishing, a man turned and requested, bring some people. Follow me to catch the person. Yes, sir. We returned to his small, lovely ha. Divan sat there, sighing tiredly. She leaned against him and let out a soft moan. Thean then whispered into Divan's ear, Thank you for saving my life. With her sharp woman's intuition, Divan realized, You are not him. She remembered the feeling from last night. Divan blushed shyly. He was never so gentle, and he would never make my body feel so strange. Divan pushed Tinthian then away and asked clearly, Who are you? Tinthian then no longer hid it. He said directly, I am an immortal from the upper realm, who was cast down to the mortal world due to a calamity. He recalled his once proud demeanor and explained, This Tinthian then is a mortal incarnation that I concealed in the human world. The scene of him with a bloodied head and a lost soul appeared. Just as he was seriously injured and his divine soul shattered, I entered his body. After hearing this, Divan's eyes widened in surprise and she exclaimed, You said you are a god. Tinthian then affirmed without a hint of hesitation, That is right. Just then, Honhon sat up and whispered, Mommy, have you and Daddy finished playing the game yet? The innocent and lovely little girl asked, Can I get up now? Honhon is hungry. Divan immediately agreed and called the little girl, Get up now. Mommy will cook for you. Tinthian then also apologized to the little girl. It took quite a while. Please understand. Just then, both of their stomachs growled in unison. Divan shyly covered her mouth and whispered, Do gods have to eat too? He humbly replied, My apologies. She stood up and kindly said, You sit here first. I will prepare a bosunen for you too. A moment later, she put the food into a boiling pot. Honhon looked on with a watering mouth. We get to eat noodles today. Can I have an extra egg? She agreed without hesitation. Of course. You can have one more. Tinthian then watched the mother and daughter from afar, his heart aching as he wondered, To think that I have cultivated the Tao of detachment since I was young, severing all emotions and attaining the Delua for 10,000 years. He was dazed and could not believe himself. My heart should be as still as water. Why did a feeling of joy suddenly arise? In Tinthian then's eyes was the happy scene of the mother and daughter. Seeing them so happy, he also thought, Is this the feeling of family? He let out a faint, contented smile. How nice. If you all feel as good as Tinthian, then do not forget to follow the Miss Manhwa channel for more exciting stories. Just as Tinthian then finished speaking, something happened. Someone burst in from the door. He brought a group of underlings and stood at the door, asking, Good morning. She was startled and dropped the bowl of noodles in her hand. The bowl of noodles fell and was about to shatter into pieces. Tinthian then quickly caught it. He asked indifferently, Who is it? In contrast to him, Divan trembled and replied in confusion, He isn't high. He showed a wicked and arrogant face. The little girl hugged Divan's leg and whimpered softly, Mommy. Honhon is scared. Tinthian then casually ate his noodles and comforted her. Do not be afraid. I am cured now. No one can hurt you. They approached and Hai asked in a raised voice, You are Tintu then, the go-between under me? Right? He nonchalantly acknowledged and dismissed them. Yes. Now scram. And I might spare you. Before Tinthian then finished, the bowl of noodles flew up and a steel fist swiftly approached. Tinthian then immediately realized the problem. That is not right. This person. Hai punched him hard. Although he raised his hand to block, Tinthian then was still sent flying, shattering the table. After the punch, he declared, Side characters die from talking too much. Divan and Honhon cried out in fear. Husband. Daddy. He smirked coldly and scornfully. Can't even handle this kind of trash. What a disgrace to me. Take them away. Hai's underling approached and asked for his opinion. But what should we do with the adult? He casually gave them full authority. Do whatever you want, and bury them all when you are done. They stepped forward with a chilling murderous intent. Thank you for the reward. And Hai. The man licked his lips greedily and reached out his hand. Divan and Honhon, terrified to the extreme, called out a second time, Husband. Daddy. Instantly, an elbow shot out and hit him straight in the face. Tinthian then paused for a moment in the air, while the man was sent flying with blood pouring from his nose. He landed with awesome coolness, and she called out happily, Ah then, Hai, with a cigarette in his mouth. Praised, Kid, you have got some skills. Tinthian then was bleeding from his mouth but was clear-headed enough to understand. His strength is not like that of a normal person. The arm that was punched earlier was swollen, and Tinthian then stood up and assessed. His whole body exudes an unusual aura. He contemptuously threw the cigarette aside. Tinthian then was startled a second time when he sensed something. Hai rushed forward. This time the punch seemed to have more internal force. I underestimated you. Tinthian then quickly ducked to avoid the blow. Then, not even a second later, another punch quickly came. He looked behind him and thought for a moment about his next move. Tinthian then used his bare hands to block the blow once again. The bones in Tinthian then's hand changed slightly. This is bad. The arm bone. Hai was overjoyed and arrogantly cheered. I think I heard a click. He swung his fist for another satisfying punch, sarcastically adding, A toy like a punching bag? Hai launched a series of continuous punches at Tinthian then, who could only use his whole body to block. Made of human flesh is the best. The more he attacked, the more enthusiastic he became. Instructing. Very good. You can block up to 80% of my punching power. Do not die before I reach my limit. Tin Thean then just took the blows, knowing exactly what he was feeling. This guy's attacks are fast, accurate, and incredibly powerful. My weak body can't last much longer. Suddenly Tin Thean then remembered something. That is right, I almost forgot. I can use that technique. He put 2 fingers together and swung them, thinking to himself, no need for vital energy. He placed his finger on his forehead, reminding himself of its use. No need for a strong body either. Tin Thean then stood amidst swirling golden talismans, one hand on his forehead performing the secret art. Luchan Divine Thoughts Shinting Martial Arts Performance. The images of the secret art spread everywhere, and he pondered, using divine thought to create a mental space where a moment lasts for 10 years, dealing with the enemy while simulating martial arts, training at super fast speeds in my head. As he was concentrating, Ha suddenly appeared and boasted, Yo, look at that stance. Tin Thean then looked at the huge fist in front of him and frowned slightly. 10 years of martial arts performance? Are you planning to use instant transmission from Dragon Ball? His eyes seemed to see through it, glowing like jade, mastering fist techniques and achieving enlightenment, with blazing eyes and a wounded face. Tin Thean then reached out to catch the fist in front of him. He entered a defensive stance and caught Ha's ultimate move, surprising him. What is going on? Tin Thean then turned to face him to get a clear view of his technique. He raised his hand to his head, concentrating deeply to block the blow. He even used his elbow to kick Hai's attack. 20 years of martial arts performance, petrification and unity. His face was scratched, and Hai became angry and cursed. Damn it! He raised his leg to counterattack Tin Thean then, I am going to cripple you completely. He could not have expected that he was one step faster and stomped on his foot. Tin Thean then, with sharp eyes and an attacking stance, 30 years of martial arts performance, Grandmaster fist techniques, state of will. He landed a punch directly on Hai's Danshin, sending him flying, using attack as a grand defense. Hai was sent flying, spitting blood, and in the astonished eyes of his underlings, they exclaimed, An Hai! He pointed at Tin Thean then and shouted, everyone charge and chop him up for me. The underlings heard this and drew their knives. They assumed an attack stance and charged forward with a fierce roar. Tin Thean then's eyes glowed like stars, and he was concentrating deeply to assess the situation. 50 years of martial arts performance, fully enlightened in the way of martial arts, the realm of true martial arts. With just one move, Tin Thean then sent all of them flying. Hai looked at the person in front of him in fear, his voice trembling but still threatening. What do you want? Do you know who is backing me? Tin Thean then's eyes were soulless, his hair flying, revealing a blood seal. He gritted his teeth and said, it is someone you definitely can't mess with. He put his arm in front of Hai's chest, and he trembled and said, if you dare to touch me. From his body, Tin Thean then pulled out a jade stone, which made Hai scream in pain. His eyes became lifeless and filled with extreme pain. Hai sat down on the ground tired, his voice trembling as he asked how he had known that. His hair fell slowly as he held the gem in his hand, seeming to understand the situation unconsciously and realizing it was that way. Tin Thean then held a gem that glowed red like fire. A bizarre aura escaped from the gem. A demonic spirit wearing a twisted smile flew out of the gem. Approaching Tin Thean then, he watched the bizarre entity. As his mind seemed to be pondering something, he spoke in a harsh and arrogant tone, his eyes burning like midnight flames. The demonic spirit from the gem became fearful and shrank back. Tin Thean then stood towering at the foot of a giant deity statue holding a glowing red item emitting a solemn aura of great divine majesty. The evil aura trembled and shrank, then let out weak sobs before crawling back into the gem. He examined the small object before him with a teasing smile and intrigued eyes, knowing it was the Yin Mountain Child Slaying Branch Cultivation Method. The demonic aura disappeared, leaving behind a normal gem, and Tin Thean then thought that through the vengeful aura of the child killer he had forced it to drain its life essence, making its combat power reach full potential. Thinking about the system linked to Hai, he mumbled that Hai was 30 years old, which explained why with both potentials fully activated his body was inferior and why whoever was behind him was certainly not from the mortal realm. Tin Thean then squatted down, observing Hai's surprised expression. Seeing the scene before him, Hai spoke in a trembling voice, calling him Ten-Tu, then correcting himself to and then as he begged to spare his life, saying he did not need food anymore. Tin Thean then looked at Hai with sharp eyes and then in a harsh tone ordered him to take his underlings and scram. Hai fearfully replied yes. He put his hands in his pockets, standing in the hall watching the group drag their heavily wounded bodies away. After the battle ended, Hon ran over calling him father. The little girl jumped up and hugged Tin Thean then joyfully and praised him, saying, "Father, you are so handsome." Before Tin Thean then could react, Hon had already given him a small kiss on the cheek. Even Tin Thean then was quite surprised at this, wondering why a mortal child's light kiss could make one feel so warm. He stammered a bit but still asked if he was handsome, and Hon quickly replied yes. Divan ran up behind him, anxiously calling out, "And then let us hurry and run away." She shyly apologized, asking whether she had forgotten about Hai yesterday after healing his wounds, and then let him go. Would someone stronger come looking for him? Then Divan urged Tin Thean, then calmly setting the little girl down and saying, "Let us quickly pack up some things." Tin Thean then hugged Divan's shoulder to reassure her, saying, "Do not fear, I deliberately let him go." Upon hearing that, she became even more curious, asking why. Tin Thean then explained calmly that spiritual energy in the mortal realm was very thin, making meditation alone take too much time for a mortal cultivation. He looked at the stone and stated firmly that the one behind Hai was likely a scattered cultivation meridian trapped in the mortal realm after separating from an immortal, and that it could help us in our cultivation. Divan was stunned by his words, stammering we what, Tinthi, and then did not hesitate, confirming it and asking if they wanted to cultivate immortality and attain the path with him. Hon innocently grabbed his hand and asked if cultivation could let one fly. And Tinthi then nodded affectionately, saying of course it can. Upon hearing that, the little girl got even more excited, shouting yes, saying she wanted to fly with father. Seeing that neither spoke, Divan became curious, asking how she and Hon should cultivate. He thought of the spiritual power gathered in the girl, and said that since Hon still had an innate immortal body as a pure yin maiden, he would refine pills that she only needed to drink. The little girl held Tinthian's hand, whimpering and asking if the pills were tasty and if he could add some sugar. He happily obliged, saying if you wanted them sweet, father would make them sweet. Hon excitedly pulled Tinthian's hand, saying as long as it was sweet she was not picky. After finishing, he turned to Divan and explained that because their bodies had matured, their innate power was gone and overindulgence had damaged their spirit. Only dual cultivation was the fastest way. Then Tinthian then hugged Divan, making her blush, and said the matter could not be delayed because to deal with the upcoming rival, we would start immediately. She turned her face away shyly and said it was not right to practice cultivation in broad daylight. From below, Hon said innocently that her father and mother had to practice seriously. Without much hesitation, the little girl ran outside to play, calling anxiously for them not to run too far. At the door, she popped her head back and asked cheekily if one afternoon would be enough. Hon's question made Divan's face redden like a tomato, while Tinthian then remained unchanged. After the little girl left, Divan asked hesitantly if they still needed the previous posture, and Tinthian then whispered that they did. As he spoke, he moved and caused her to lose balance and fall, and she said no. Divan was spun around and looked confused as she stammered out, and then Tinthian then grabbed her trembling legs, and she asked what he was going to do. Seeing her confusion, Tinthian then adjusted their posture and instructed her to stay calm and follow his guidance. Divan's face twisted in discomfort, and she said her back could not take any more. Suddenly he placed his hand before her to reassure her and said comfort would come quickly. Tinthian then reclined into the same posture to practice Song Tu Ixu and Fopsin Lin and Im Da Devon Kuch Yang. Tinthian then lifted his legs so their feet touched and commenced Ti Late and Ingu Tang. Once the posture was correct, Tinthian then chanted Phut Te Diu Kan and How Tu Thin Front Tin. Then Divan closed her eyes to feel the intensity and found her whole body much lighter as a warm comforting sensation flowed from him. She could feel as if a small block of wood and a tranquil scene appeared before her eyes. She likened it to lying in a comfortable bathtub as if bathing in a hot spring. At night, the city buildings lit up with sparkling lights. Inside a luxurious room, Tethu sat on a sofa with a woman. He propped his foot on the table and draped his other arm over her shoulder as they sang together Mio Mio. She pretended to be coy in front of him and Kudedu Mio Mio. As they sang, the door burst open and someone called out breathlessly to Tethu. He turned briefly, then resumed singing as he teased Tiu Hai for rushing to find him with items as promised and warned he would sing Mio 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 if she did not say she loved him. Hai ran before Tiu Diet and kowtowed, apologizing to Tethu. His face was scratched all over, and he thought the girl's father must have learned some dangerous demonic skill to suddenly become so powerful despite being known only as a womanizer. I led a group of brothers risking our lives yet was no match for him, thought Tiu Diet as he glanced at Hai in silence. Then he crushed the microphone in his hand. Seeing this, Hai quickly slapped his head on the floor begging for mercy and said to Tethu, spare my life. Tiu Diet closed his eyes and sneered, reminding Hai that victory and defeat were natural and that he upheld clear rewards and punishments. He leaned forward to push the woman aside and told Hai that he had served him for many years and deserved a great reward. Tethu forcefully flung her to Hai's side and told him to take her as his plaything. He caught her with outstretched arms and his eyes welled with joy as he stammered thank you to Tethu for the reward. He suddenly laughed aloud. Ooh! Then Tiu Diet extended his hand forward. He placed his hand on Hai's shiny head, surprising him. The oppressive force made his eyes go wide. Tethu! He used his power to paralyze Hai, and his legs trembled as he wondered why. Tethu stood above and looked down, stating that strict rewards and punishments were to be enforced. Merit is rewarded, and it was fine if he did not bring her back. He ground his teeth in anger, but had lost the talisman that Tethu had given him. Tiu Diet raised his hand and a red-black aura appeared as he declared this offense must be punished. He seized the thing and pulled it from Hai, whose eyes turned milky white as he sobbed. The woman was shocked and screamed while Tethu paid no attention and continued to berate Hai as a useless piece of trash. He put it into his mouth and ate it, saying that only Tethu himself should handle the rest. She trembled as she said to Tethu and added that if there was nothing else she would leave first. He glanced over and smiled, telling the little princess it was not over yet and that she had been unprofessional. Tiu Diet pointed a finger at Hai's head. He began using that set lundi on him. The veins on Hai's face stood out clearly, and his eyes turned completely white. His teeth lengthened and sharpened with a crackling sound. Hai's skin turned to Shen and he tensed then roared as dark auras radiated around him. When he finished roaring, he lowered his head to the floor, and she hugged herself in fear. Hai whipped his head around and looked at her, causing her to scream, do not. He quickly lunged like a wild beast. Grr, she cried in fear and screamed. Do not. With a slash, her body was cut apart by Hai and scattered everywhere. Blood pooled on his fingers and ran down without stopping. She lay in a large pool of blood. Her high heel also flew off her foot. Hai drooled and growled, "Eat, eat, eat." At Tiu Diet's command, he lunged at the corpse like a hungry beast. Then after eating his fill, he followed his master to kidnap someone. Tin Thian and Divan were still cultivating together. Their faces were pressed close, only a few inches from touching lips. Red blood cells began circulating smoothly in their veins. Their lungs also continued to move and release tiny bubbles. Their Kai immediately flowed smoothly. He sat up to meditate, and her body fell to the ground. Divan propped herself up and slowly sat upright. Tin Thian then opened his eyes and asked how it felt. She clasped her hands and stretched, saying her body had never felt so comfortable and that postpartum back pain from giving birth to Hon Hon had also vanished. He smiled at Divan and said their bodies had reversed innate restrictions and were full of vitality, so they would continue. Hearing this, her cheeks flushed and she asked what they would continue since they were already finished. He sat still and said the enemy was no longer an ordinary person and that they had to open their microcosmic orbit and reach the Ki refining realm quickly before she protested that in TV shows it took years and questioned how it could be achieved instantly. Tin Thian then held up a yellow fragment and said that while normal cultivation took a long time, he had comprehended the Tao in the upper realm for 10,000 years and that combining it with the dual cultivation method could achieve entry in one night. She looked puzzled and pointed at the yellow fragment, realizing it contained primordial essence. Cultivation is essentially generating essence, transforming Kai and refining spirit, and the most basic essence generation method involves breath suspension to enter meditation. Dual cultivation will no longer stray. And also the Thai B method. The Thai B method is a common demonic technique to rapidly increase cultivation by using MS and disciples to merge with the body, forcibly stimulating the flesh while preserving the primordial essence. Generated, she bent down to look more closely, realizing it contained primordial essence. Divan sat close to hear his explanation, and he said this crude, inefficient Thai B device was still enough for them to surpass the Ki refining stage. This could not be delayed, and only a swift breakthrough would allow them to protect Hon Hon. She frowned and asked what she needed to do to start quickly. He did not answer and simply placed the yellow fragment in his mouth. Tin Thian then seated Divan in his lap and bit the demon talisman as she followed his guidance. She also followed the guidance and bit into the yellow fragment, causing a deep pink aura to radiate around them. The dual cultivation essence to Ki method drew essence into the Danshan to nourish Yang with water and fire, initiating Qui growth and targeting the 3 acupoints V-Gen, Gip Touch and Ninja Ki Chem. Her hip felt tight and unbearably so. After he spoke, Divan let out a small sigh. She opened her eyes wide, thinking it was too embarrassing. Tin Thian then spoke to reassure her and said not to be afraid, because this was the sign of a breakthrough at the 3 collaterals, and that pain was natural, but their dual cultivation would combine their strength so they could break through quickly, and he would help her first. Divan sensed something and opened her eyes wide. A current of energy ran down her body. Divan's body drenched in sweat. She placed her hand on his chest and felt a warm current flow from his head to toe. She asked excitedly if that meant they had succeeded and if the effect of dual cultivation was really that simple and fast. Tin Thian then removed the demon talisman and said dual cultivation looked simple but was actually very difficult. Because in cultivation both people must trust each other completely, but when I first began everyone was selfish and wary of one another. Truly very few people can be completely trusted, and one can always turn the dual cultivation method into a killing, nourishing formation. Divan looked at Tin Thian then in puzzlement, asking if he had just descended to the mortal realm and already trusted her so completely. He looked at her with tender eyes and said that in his sea of consciousness he still retained all her memories, and that his incarnation had wronged her, but that in his eyes she was a priceless treasure. Hearing Tin Thian then say that caused Divan to pause briefly. He bit the demon talisman and moved closer as he told her it was her turn to help him break through. The scene shifted to a sandy beach, where small hands were sculpting shapes. It was Hon Hon happily playing. A foot was approaching from behind. Hai in a monstrous form approached the little girl. Divan sat and Tin Thian then slapped, cultivating together as a current of energy radiated around them. He sensed something was wrong and opened his eyes to look over. Tin Thian then lowered his hand and announced that the enemy had arrived, which surprised her. Divan turned urgently and worried to look for her child Hon Hon. He quickly reached out to hug her and held her tightly, telling her not to move. Tin Thian then braced one hand on the ground and sprang up, telling her to focus on helping him break through while he handled the rest. He quickly dashed off. Hon Hon was building a sandcastle when she looked up to the side. The little girl opened her eyes wide at the monster charging at her and called loudly for father and mother. Just as Hai was about to pounce, a foot kicked him hard. Tin Thian then was holding Divan, and he appeared instantly to protect Hon Hon. The little girl grabbed his leg in fear, saying there was a monster and she was very scared. Tin Thian then kept his eyes on Hai and reassured her to stand behind with her eyes closed because he would protect her. He staggered to his feet, making a crackling sound, and then growled a few times. He watched Hai and thought that this was refining and that someone behind Hai had already taken action. His eyes turned blood red as he charged at Tin Thian, then he delivered a powerful punch to Hai, unleashing his full potential and merging strike and transformation. He looked down at the punch site and his body trembled uncontrollably. Although his lip was bleeding, he still stood firm and looked up at Tin Thian, then he frowned at Hai, noting that this was the problem with refining, as it feared neither death nor pain. He embraced the idea of fighting to the death with his opponent. He reached out and grabbed Tin Thian's arm. Hai raised his hand high to strike back. His sharp claws slowly lowered. Suddenly Tin Thian's body radiated a golden light as the Yi's anicaps point opened. Divan screamed in panic. Husband! A beam of light ran from the top of his head down his spine. Tin Thian then punched Hai's chest with tremendous force. Accompanied by that light, around them both a golden aura covered them. Unlocking Chu Thin Dekai and reaching the QI refining realm, his eyes also turned golden. Chine Fop Haiyan Men, Tin Thian then struck him again with a palm attack, using Chen Ding Faciest. Hit by the palm, he screamed in pain. He collapsed to the ground to Divan's surprise. He turned and asked if she was okay, and she said she was fine. Hon Hon emerged from behind the sand dune, asking if father and mother had defeated the monster. They both smiled brightly, saying yes, we have won. The three of them gathered, and she exclaimed that it was Hai. Divan bent down and asked what had happened to him. He had been subjected to refining. She covered her mouth with her hand, asking if he was like the reanimated corpses from AV shows. Undead cannot be handled so easily, and this was merely a puppet using a living soul for spirit refinement. Suddenly a pair of hands applauded continuously, making a loud clapping sound. It was Tu Diet who walked forward applauding from behind. He chuckled and said being able to break this young master's refining proved he was also from the arcane sect, so it made sense he could defeat that fierce beast so thoroughly. Tin Thian then turned to Divan and told her to take their daughter inside, and that he had to be careful. She said this, then hurriedly carried Hon Hon into the how. Tu Diet stared at Divan's departing back. He stroked his chin in amazement that a minor cultivator like him had such a gifted furnace. Truly a heavenly treasure. He glanced back to see that Tu Diet was still stroking his chin without noticing. Tin Thian then dashed toward him, then bent low. He focused force in his arm and punched Tu Diet. Using Tung Sadra Gi Tun Si Thoksut and Bing Sen, he smiled without a trace of worry. A slash flew toward Tin Thian, then from nowhere, he quickly rolled backward to dodge. The other man also swiftly lunged forward. He leaped high and raised his sword above his head, preparing to strike. Tin Thian then sat up and raised both hands in defense. He then slashed down fiercely, and Tin Thian then tilted to the side to dodge. Tin Thian then grabbed the sword with one hand and raised his other hand. He palm-struck his stomach, shattering him to pieces. Tin Thian then took the sword and wiped his sweat, saying Zhu Mes and Bun Sao, and asked what moves he had left. Tu Diet faced him and laughed loudly, saying you had to risk your life to knock down the refining creature I created at will in a small me bin. He then sneered, daring to think he could compete with this young master. Tu Diet arrogantly exuded red aura and sent his refining creatures rising from the ground as he proclaimed that he would let the cultivator feel the insurmountable gap between him and the clan inheritor of the meridian, Alakapon. And if you obediently hand over your wife and daughter, and then kneel to lick my shoes, you will attain perfect Kai refining. Tu Diet pointed his finger to the ground, saying he would reward him with a chance to be a dog. The group of refining creatures behind him leaped up to attack Tin Thian, then he just stood still and grinned with no worry. They were stunned to see Tin Thian then just standing still. A hand from behind squeezed Tu Diet's neck, cutting off his breath. His eyes widened as he looked behind him. Hai squeezed hard and then lifted Tu Diet's body into the air. His red eyes screamed out in surprise how he could refine along the Yang path at all, let alone like this. Tu Diet looked at him in confusion, thinking why this refining was so strong. Tin Thian then walked in front of him and explained that this was the orthodox way to use refining to merge Yun parasites with the body to further enhance mobility and attack power. On Hai's chest was the demon talisman that he had attached. Tu Diet tried to pry his hand off, thinking this would subdue the refining creature and that he had lost his chance to be a pawn. He screamed so loudly that veins bulged in his eyes, declaring that everything about this young master was a treasure. Tu Diet raised his finger to his mouth and bit it. He smeared the blood in a long streak across his forehead and said, "Look at this." A purple sigil appeared on Tu Diet's forehead. A purple aura was released from his body. Kim Tim Kasinung. Tu Diet waved his hand and laughed wickedly. Tin Thian then remained silent and observed. He said nothing. Tu Diet sneered and spoke sarcastically. "You are done for." He surged forward like wind using the Vo Totemsi's Tejum Nung Tun Kai technique. Tin Thian then clenched his hand into a fist. He struck Tu Diet 3 times in succession with maximum force at a single point, sealing his acupoints. Then Tin Thian then delivered another strike, sending him flying backward. Tu Diet was hit in many vital spots and his body trembled violently. He fell to his knees and screamed in pain, "You." Tu Diet gritted his teeth and cursed with hatred. "You are courting death." He pulled at his shirt and growled, "I want to kill you to death." Tu Diet held the talisman close to his mouth. He whispered into the talisman, "See you Lin Nin Theo Len Ta." Tu Diet repeatedly chanted obscure incantations. Tin Thian then glanced at him with raised brows curiously. Tu Diet bowed his head, chanting Wei Eltruku while glancing up at him. Tin Thian then walked over silently. He slapped him hard across the face. Tu Diet was slapped into unconscious collapse, his ruined meridians leaving him ever more foolish. He continued to taunt, chanting soul-summoning incantations in the face of his enemy. He looked over to see Hai moving incessantly. Tin Thian then smirked inscrutably. Time to get to work. He reached out and tapped the wooden door lightly. Then he spoke to reassure those inside. "Do not fear, it is me." Divan opened the door and Tin Thian then said cheerfully, "Everything has been handled." She breathed a long sigh of relief. Suddenly she jolted as she looked up. Behind Tin Thian then stood Tu Diet and Hai. Divan gasped, This is... The little girl clung to Divan's leg. "Hon Hon," cried the monster's back. He maintained a calm expression as he stared at Hon Hon. Tin Thian then sat down and patted the girl's head. telling her not to fear as it is obedient and will do whatever you ask. Hon asked in disbelief, "Is that true?" He replied, "Try it." The girl approached Hai timidly, asking, "Do you know how to make a heart gesture?" He heard this and released Tu Diet's leg immediately. Hai raised his hands above his head, forming a heart shape. Growl. Hon's eyes lit up in delight. She exclaimed, "Want to plant another banana tree?" He also obeyed and did as the little girl said. After one more time her mother called, "Alright Hon, go inside first." Divan looked at Tu Diet lying on the ground. She asked, "And then why did you bring him here?" Tinthian then explained that in this era spiritual energy is thin and spirit treasures are extinct. They are remnants of a Mimsen lineage who accumulated essence over the years. From his appearance he must be the heir of this meridian, having reached peak Kai refining and full of essence. He can help us quickly advance. Also his body is full of treasures. We should check if he can produce any powerful artifacts for other enemies and to protect Hon. At a secluded and quiet residence, inside Tu Diet was bound tightly to an old wooden chair. He furrowed his brow aggressively and was extremely uncomfortable. Then he yelled, "How dare you bind me without knowing who I am?" Bound as he was, he remained arrogant. "You are just a minor cultivator and yet you dare to mess with the family from southeast." Tu Diet flexed his neck and threatened, "Do you believe me?" Just as he opened his mouth, a rotten sock was shoved into it, rendering him speechless. The stench of the rotten sock made him retch. He struggled to shout. Meanwhile Hon was playing happily with Hai. Tinthian then approached him to prepare for a search. "Let us begin to see if he has any usable treasures." He decisively snatched the chain from Tu Diet's neck. Divan wondered, "What is this seal for?" Tinthian then explained that this is called Fapin, used to contract with Cu Ujama, dividing into Tridu-Ku. Enro-Ku, only powerful demons beyond their control require a price to summon. But this Tridu-Ku seal was coarsely made and could not summon any powerful demon, and Tu Diet could not respond. He spat out the sock and cursed that only a fool would dare touch the young master. For this is a treasured heirloom of the Ta family. Tu Diet began explaining that it was the Hung Lul Ku V, which once has terrorized the mortal realm and was made to serve for centuries. Asking, "Do you truly not know the terror of the Ta family?" These nonsensical words had barely left his lips when Tinthian then slapped him. He glared at him angrily. "Do you dare strike me?" Tinthian then slapped Tu Diet another time. "You chattermouth." After searching he acquired a counterfeit Biku Ving seal. He obtained a Kimtum C. It was a low-grade Seuli ancestral parasite. Next Tinthian then slowly removed Tu Diet's belt. Divan blushed and asked, "And then why are you removing his trousers?" The trousers then fell, revealing his hairy legs. What he wanted was that belt. He acquired a spirit-type artifact called Dia Lung Yama N. Inside his shirt he also obtained a stack of Yumisen's spirit soldier talismans. No one expected Tu Diet's taste to be so perverse that he wore an undergarment inside, obtaining a protective garment artifact called Kim Kwang Fi Blow. Tinthian then curiously picked up the wallet and wondered what it was, as Divan had never seen one. He pulled out a black card showing no magical fluctuations. Its craftsmanship was exquisite and it looked like a bank card, though Divan had never seen this color. Tu Diet boasted that it was a VIP black card that ordinary slum dwellers like them could never hope to attain, and it offered unlimited swipes. He even offered if they released him, this would be theirs. Tinthian then replied that such ordinary money would soon have countless people competing to offer it to them. Hearing the reply like a bucket of cold water to the face, he could only clutch his rage. After a morning of harvesting, the spoils lay neatly on the table. Divan exclaimed in amazement. His entire body was truly full of treasures. Tinthian then criticized harshly that the quality was too poor, but in this era better something than nothing. Tu Diet's eyes turned unusually sly. He parted his lips in laughter. A parasite suddenly flew beside him. Tinthian then told her to stop praising, and that next they had to deal with the greatest treasure. Divan asked in puzzlement, "Where is the greatest treasure?" He pointed at Tu Diet, saying the essence of a peak Kai refiner is the greatest elixir for cultivators. In an era of depleted spiritual energy it is not easy to reach peak Kai refining at such an age. He had surely consumed essence from many others. At this he was so afraid he broke into a cold sweat. "What do you intend to do?" Tinthian then met his gaze coldly and said, "You consumed others' essence and now it is reclaimed. Is not that only fair?" Tu Diet shouted that his father, mother, and any elder in his clan could crush them, accusing them of being blind to challenge the family. The best way to shut this blabber up is to give him a punch in the face. Tu Diet's face was now swollen and Divan worried, could essence only be absorbed by speaking aloud as before? Tinthian then smiled and replied, "How could he be allowed to enjoy this fortune? Besides the diaphragm method there is also the Setsang Yogain method, and masters at certain levels can even perform essence absorption directly from the target's body." Divan felt enlightened and said she had read Wuxia novels and urged him to absorb essence now, as she felt no guilt draining such an evil person clean. Seeing Tu Diet's suffering she felt somewhat delighted. However, Tinthian then said, "Our realm is still far too low. We must still use the dual cultivation method to achieve such essence absorption." He grew serious and said, "Let us begin quickly." Divan and guard asked Tinthian then, "Do we still have to use those strange postures?" He approached and held her hand and reassured her, "This time we will not use them." The principle of the essence absorption method is simple, as it arises when two cultivators clash, generating a strong Kai vortex that forcibly draws essence from the target. Two streams of Ki collide to form a powerful vortex that creates suction at acupoints, forcibly drawing essence from the target's body. Divan exclaimed in surprise, "So it is like cupping therapy?" Tinthian then answered that according to this incarnation's knowledge of the current world, then that was indeed correct. Let us begin. Tin Thean then placed his lips on hers. The Kai source light flared as their Kai exchanged in a Song Unji Temen essence absorption ritual. He reached toward Tu Diet's shoulder and immediately the essence of Tu Diet was drawn away, and Tin Thean then used his lips to transfer essence to Dai Van. The immense power caused discomfort to spread throughout her meridians. He encouraged her to endure as absorbing essence would shock their meridians, and to follow his guidance directing the absorbed essence into their Ki Si. Meanwhile at the family residence a quiet space suddenly became noisy. Sounds of hurried footsteps approached. Steward Trong hurried in to report. The family elder's in trouble. He called out anxiously. Elder Master, the young master is in trouble. He frowned and shouted, he has honored guests. How dare you be so rude? The Grand Master smiled kindly and said it was fine as Steward Truong was always cautious and rushing surely meant something important. He then asked what trouble the young master had encountered. He looked around fearfully and stammered this. Master then said, since the Grand Master has asked, just speak plainly. He stammered and finally reported that the parasite offspring the young master brought had flown away, and he had immediately questioned subordinates about the young master's whereabouts. Steward Trong fell silent again. The Grand Master remained calm and listened attentively. He continued that the young master had tried to rescue a girl from thugs selling her and left his entourage to act alone. Those thugs turned out to be low-level dark cultivators who ambushed him, leaving him trapped. Steward Trong stammered that he did not know whether he was alive or dead. Master just slammed his hand on the table in anger. What? He ordered at once. Release the parasite offspring to guide me. Tu Diet, having been raised by this monk, understood etiquette and was clever, and that a family head had also helped this monk greatly this time. He clasped his hands and said the humble monk did not know how to repay him. Let this monk handle this matter on behalf. Master laughed heartily and said since the Grand Master has spoken he would not be polite and requested his help for his son, and expressed his thanks. He turned to Steward Truong and said this matter cannot be delayed. Please guide the way. Tu Diet was bound tightly to the chair and cursed, damn it. He looked up with a contorted face and yelled, what do you think you are doing and dare to damage my foundation and steal my cultivation? Dai Van paid no heed and just stretched, saying that felt so comfortable. She was surprised and said she could even hear Hon Hon playing outside at the park. Tin Thean then also said happily that their realms had increased and their spiritual senses would naturally improve. Tu Diet looked at them both and stammered, you have. The two had now reached peak Kai refining. Their bodies were enveloped by a dazzling golden light. He tilted his head toward him with a smirk. Next we must see what bait you release can bring us. Upon hearing this, Tu Diet's eyes widened in surprise. He lowered his head, worried, his body trembling. How could you know? Tin Thean then observed calmly that using spirit insects to send messages and bragging like this was foolish when he should have mixed 100 male-female pearl insects into countless spirit insects to conceal their trail. He laughed and said, you are a precious star like the 1,000-mile male-female pearl insect. Only noble clans can keep a pair of mother and child, yet you dare claim to use tens of thousands of spirit insects? He slapped Tu Diet's cheek to make it swell. Hush. Tin Thean then turned toward Divan. Let us go prepare first. Not understanding, she asked. Prepare what? He took the stack of talismans from the table and explained that the next enemy would likely be at the foundation establishment stage, and that although they were at peak Kai refining facing a foundation, Master would be like children fighting adults without weapons. Divan continued, what should we do? Tin Thean then replied that while cultivation level decides strength, strategy and artifacts can change victory, if a child and adult both hold weapons, the child still has a chance to win despite the disadvantage. If the child had a weapon like a gun in this era, both sides could win or lose, but if... She smiled and pointed skyward, adding that if a child's weapon is far better than an adult's, then it will surely win. Tin Thean then held Tu Diet's chain and noted that these artifacts work against pure cultivators but are useless against foundation masters. He placed both hands inside the chain. Let me modify this artifact. Outside the hall, the blazing sunlight shone everywhere. A silhouette lit from above, one hand touching the ground to maintain balance. Steward Trong looked up and said, this is the place. The Grand Master approached from behind. Let this monk first observe a bit. He closed his eyes and pressed his hands together. Fada Mundur Theng Thut. The Grand Master slowly opened his eyes and they had turned golden, revealing via Nun Thung the Nut Nun. His vision then zoomed to a small hall. Inside were Tin Thean and Divan eating noodles. There were two peak Kai refining cultivators. Then his vision shifted to Hon Hon playing with Hai and an array of strange refining creatures, revealing them as dark cultivators. He turned and asked, young master, how is he? The Grand Master looked intently and replied, young Master Te is still alive, but his Kai was somewhat weak and it seemed he had been forcibly stripped of his foundation by some dark art. He seemed to sense it and turned around, noting the Then Nun Thung, and how quickly he arrived, which surprised the Grand Master, who continued to stare ahead. Steward Trong clasped his hands and bowed his head, still hoping the Grand Master would save our young master. The moment he looked up, the Grand Master had vanished to his astonishment. He arrived at Tin Thean's courtyard, where he was already waiting. Tin Thean then spoke first, asking who had come. The Grand Master observed him and thought it odd that despite only having Kai refining cultivation, his spirit depth was undetectable. He stepped closer to Tin Thean then. My name is Batman and I have come to reclaim the young master of the family. The Grand Master politely raised a hand to his chest and bowed, still hoping the benefactor would return to the righteous path. Tin Thean then thought to himself that these were again the Western doctrine of laying down the sword to become Buddha. He spoke saying that he saw the Grand Master as one who preached morals but did not act, and that the family young master had abducted his daughter to practice dark arts and intended to silence him and his wife, and that he had only survived by chance and his ability to fight back. He asked frankly, "What does the Grand Master intend?" Steward Tro behind him hurriedly retorted, "You heretic charlatan spreading lies?" The Grand Master spoke gently. "This Tu died of mine learned manners young and is civil. Master, you rely only on one side, and there is tainted refining we have never seen. How can you convince others? You should release him quickly." He made an offer. "I will give you a path of survival." Tin Thean then scorned his moralizing, mouthing virtue while ignorant. Calling him Batman, he pressed the blade to Tu Diet's neck and said, "Release him or I will take his life." Then he slid the knife along Tu Diet's throat as a threat. Steward Trong flew into rage. "You market trash with evil intent, dare harm my young master's priceless body, and we will make you pay with your lives." The Grand Master folded his hands and chanted, "Adithiot," then vowed to subdue demons and harvest souls. He spoke loudly. "You inside must hear this. If you harm Tu Diet, I will slay you all." Realizing something, Tin Thean then widened his eyes in surprise. Indeed, the Grand Master had begun his attack. He thrust his palm toward Tin Thean, then he smiled triumphantly. This confirmed Tin Thean that his plan had worked. The Grand Master feared to kill him outright and sought to capture him as a bargaining chip, giving Tin Thean then an unbeatable position. The Grand Master arrogantly declared, "The gulf between us is clear, Master, you know this, so do not force me." Immediately, Tin Thean then summoned a Ghost General. The Grand Master reacted swiftly and pulled Steward Truong back. He gasped, pointing at Tin Thean, "Then he can summon spirit soldiers too? No, this is a higher class." Looking closer, Steward Truong shouted, "That is a Ghost General." The Grand Master remained calm and admitted, "The Master has some real power, so no wonder my nephew fell into your trap, yet a lone Ghost General is not enough." No sooner said than two more Ghost Generals appeared to challenge him. As the Ghost General charged, the Grand Master quickly formed a golden shield to block it. The Ghost General beside Tin Thean then also rushed into fight. It leapt up and slashed the golden shield. The Grand Master folded his hands calmly and bowed his head, chanting a Dai Fat. Then he raised his hand and dozens of Ghost Generals appeared, demanding to save their souls. Steward Truong laughed in delight. A single Ghost General is no match for a Foundation Master. Something flew swiftly at the Grand Master, and he noticed and opened his eyes wide. He reached out and caught it easily. Unexpectedly, upon touching his hand, a bizarre aura erupted. A hand emerged from a pit behind it. It grasped the Grand Master's throat. Steward Truong recoiled in shock. "This is..." Tin Thean then kindly informed him the Ghost Generals were merely to buy time to summon this being. Now the true Demon King had arrived and seized the Grand Master. The Grand Master's eyes bulged, his veins stood out, asking, "Is this the Demon King?" Steward Truong too was terrified. "This is the Demon King our family raised for 100 years. How could you summon it?" Tin Thean then spoke. "To bind gods and demons, one uses desire as the chain and fulfills their cravings. This truth has never changed." The Demon King tilted its head slowly, and its cold gaze swept over him as if assessing. Upon seeing the famed summoning, Steward Truong could hardly believe the Grand Master, but Munstronger should not be so easily controlled. The Grand Master choked his eyes wide with anger, realizing he was deceived to cast dispelling arts, then trapped so the Demon King could control him. Seeing Tin Thean then smiled deceitfully, he squinted, thinking, "If not so, then the Demon King would only spar with me in cunning ways." This youth's mind is astoundingly deep. The Demon King's choke tightened until the Grand Master gasped and coughed blood. As the Grand Master struggled, the Demon King mercilessly drove its claw into his chest. After the brutal strike, the Demon King withdrew its hand, revealing a glowing blue gem in its palm. Holding the gem, the king laughed with pleasure, calling it Trafisir Elixir. Without hesitation, the Demon King opened its maw to consume the elixir, but before its tongue touched it, Tin Thean then spoke up, "Do not eat it, this must be handed to me." Hearing this, the Demon King paused and glanced at him in astonishment. Then it hurled the Grand Master aside and vanished. In an instant, the Demon King appeared before Tin Thean, then with claws at his throat and murderous intent in its eyes. With a stern face, it declared, "The Trexager elixir you gave me grants only one use, and if not, I could have devoured you and your wife for harming my hairs, yet you still dare command me for spoils." Unfazed, he replied, "The Arcanian to Yang transmogrification I offer can help you break through to the upper Demon King realm, and I have more to give." The Demon King responded in a low tone that in all the divine lands, fewer than 100 reach Foundation stage, and with this rare elixir plus the dark arts you offer, I will breach Pekin in under a year. He asked seriously if there was anything more precious. Hearing this, Tin Thean then calmly pushed the Demon King's hand aside. He leaned close and whispered in its ear that, for example, the cultivation method to ascend from Demon King to the next Demon Progenitor level. The Demon King's eyes widened in disbelief. "How could this lost art survive 1,000 years, yet you possess it?" Tin Thean then pointed behind the Demon King and said, "After I deal with these two, I will relay the method and you can judge for yourself." The Demon King's gaze slowly swept the Grand Master and Steward Truong as if weighing a decision, then it turned and eyed him inscrutably. After a moment, it tossed the Trestizir elixir to Tin Thean, then who caught it swiftly. He clenched the elixir with vigilant determination. As the Demon King began to fade, it reminded him if he lied it would show no mercy. Watching the Demon King absorb into the seal, Tin Thean then thought, "Financiers of late Buddhist sorcery grow arrogant. I will grant you a supreme demon art and you must train fiercely until the day you emerge as my demon thrall." With that, he squeezed the seal and smiled triumphantly. Once this was settled, he turned to Steward Truong and said, "Tell your master to pay value for value if he wants this filth back." He helped the Grand Master up and Steward Truong replied, "State your price so I can report it." Tin Thian then feigned indifference and said, "Prepare as much as you value him, then depart." Hearing this, Steward Truong departed, reminding them he would faithfully convey their words and warning they had offended two great powers in the southwest, that a clan and the Lotus sect be careful, playing with knives. With that he turned and walked away. Only after they left did Tin Thian then quietly re-enter the house. As he entered, his wife and child ran out calling husband daddy. Hon Hon saw the Trixie's elixir in his hand and asked with sparkling eyes what treasure this was. Beautiful and fun. He smiled lovingly and explained it was the Tritrifisir elixir refined by foundation masters in their danshan. Tu Diet, with his wounded face bound, still cried in disbelief, "How could you defeat Grand Master Beat Min, who is an elder of the Lotus sect and a mid-foundation master?" Before he finished, he received a sharp slap from Tin Thian then. It was deafening, yet Tin Thian then used Ki refined strike, so he did not need to be closed. Nearby Divan leaned in softly and asked, "Should we now dual cultivate with this?" Tin Thian then stood center room forming a seal summoning green light and said, "You have grown quite skilled." Divan blushed furiously and stammered, "There is no, although it is very comfortable." Embarrassed, she hugged her glowing cheeks. Divan spoke earnestly, saying she seriously wished to learn from him, and Tin Thian then laughed at her cute gesture and praised her sincerity. Her face burned like autumn leaves, and Hon Hon tugged her skirt, saying, "Mama, why is your face so red?" Divan bent to her daughter and said, "My dear, it is late, so go to sleep." She carried Hon Hon forward, leaving Tin Thian then behind shyly, saying, "Parents have to work overtime on cultivation." The child's innocent question struck her unexpectedly, asking if progress makes one more comfortable. Divan's face blazed like a tomato and she shook her head, saying, "Of course not." Laying Hon Hon in bed, she smiled and said, "We improve to be stronger so we can protect you, and you will never be taken by evil." Hon Hon cheerfully said, "Yes, parents, improve and protect me." The innocent girl lay down and pulled up the covers, saying she was asleep and would not open her eyes. Returning to Tin Thian, then S sighed. Divan sighed softly. In the small kitchen space, his voice called a Thian then about this matter. Divan bent slightly and propped on one knee, breathing fast. This foundation stage dual cultivation is so strange. Tin Thian then S silhouette trembled at her feet. He had her sit on his lap and explained, "This technique opens the invulnerable sight in foundation stage," and her hip glowed under the sun. She turned and asked, "Did we not already have the Treftrichu elixir and absorb it as before?" Lying below, he replied, "From ply refining to foundation, one must condense Kai into elixir form in the body," and he supported her hip and continued that normally foundation building takes over 10 years. To strengthen body and bones to contain compressed energy, think of it like a balloon being inflated. If the shell is weak, it will burst. The balloon would shatter under too much pressure, ripping vessels inside. The image of giant Tu Diet grabbing Hon Hon appeared, and he said, "This boy from Emson Peak could use dark arts to skip body training, forcing a rush into foundation phase." Nervous pathways appeared, and now our dual cultivation clears the invulnerable site so our wounds heal instantly. Divan smiled and said, "I see, so even if the balloon leaks we can heal immediately and the vessels will not burst." Tin Thian then called up and said, "For this session, eliminate all distractions." Spiritual energy gathered in the void and Divan's body glowed, and he said, "When we feel peak arousal in this, we produce elixirs that unlock our invulnerable sight." She looked incredulous and asked, "Can our bodies be so miraculous?" He winked and said, "Like a gem hidden as a stone, no one knows the treasure within until recognized." Tin Thian then pressed an acupoint on Divan's back and said, "Let us begin." Startled, she let out a small cry. Her leg trembled and her voice grew softer. Her whole body arched and she clenched her hands. Her sudden movement stunned Tin Thian. Then below, his face flushed, his thoughts raced. What is this sensation? His legs quivered and his heart trembled. Divan's face blazed and sweat dotted her body, asking why this is so comfortable. Eyes closed, he felt this was his first foundation session and he had never experienced such bliss. Over her he moaned, "This is too much more comfortable than our first session. I can hold on." From her body flowed green Ki strands. The elixir had emerged. From his body spiritual energy also burst forth. Absorb it. Divan turned and began absorbing the light from his body. He likewise drained the immortal Ki from her, ensuring no more weakness and perfect body and some mastery of sorcery. A leg trembled at witnessing their session. Tu Diet, battered and swollen, watched them and wondered what invulnerable sight was, as he had never heard of it. Noticing another presence, Tin Thian then glanced toward the door.